Welcome to the e-commerce growth show, brought to you by Segmentify.
Hello everyone, this is Carlos again for another episode of the e-commerce growth show. I'm with EVOLVE, today joined by Bradley Lane, someone that I started a relationship online about 4 years ago, and I'm really excited to have you here, along with my very good friend, Scott Emmons. So Scott, as usual, could you please do the honors, introduce Brad, and then we get at it.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Carlos, and welcome everybody to another episode of the e-commerce growth show USA. And Bradley Lane is going to be our first guest that we get a chance to meet and learn about here and there. So welcome, Bradley. We're really glad to have you join us today on the show.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Carlos. Lovely to be with you both today.
Great. So again, thank you. Looking, at kind of your past and what you've done career-wise on the way to today. I see that you started at the House of Fraser a while back.
Yeah.
A storied department store retailer, not without their trials and tribulations, right?
Very much so.
And then I've had a long career with John Lewis as well. So we'd be interested in maybe the starting point is what got you interested in retail, and it appears to me, just looking at your once again at your resume, that you've sort of been on the e-commerce side of it from the beginning.
Mm. In fact, from the very beginning, my career started when I was at college. So back in the day, many years ago, I wanted to work in the airline industry. That was my drive. I did work experience with British Airways, and from an early age, I've always been attracted to large brands, customer-facing roles. So yeah, I did work experience with BA back in the early part of education as such, and then I joined a retailer on a part-time basis when I was at college called Littlewoods. So that's now become a UK catalogue business. It used to have a store presence, but I started with Littlewoods as a selling associate, selling assistant, as we call here in the UK, and then progressed within the business. So retail in its entirety has always been part of my journey as such. So I progressed into management, working with Littlewoods, and then moved on to House of Fraser. So my journey within House of Fraser started on the shop floor, in fact. Then I moved into buying. Then I moved on to join John Lewis. And that's when I really moved into the digital space that we know today.
Digital space.
What a journey it's been. Yeah, what a journey it's been.
How thinking back, to your time, at House of Fraser, where you were on the floor, the selling, out on the, as a sales associate, I assume. How important was that perspective, as you moved, to back a house? To me, I think that's crucial. But how do you, how did it contribute to your career, do you think?
I think it was the fundamentals. It's fundamentally, it's so important in terms of retail, talking to customers, not making assumptions or just interpreting data. So it really gave me the opportunity to speak to the end user as such, but also influence colleagues within head office, because I worked in the Marble Arch, that's within London, on Oxford Street, so their #1 store. And I very much had a dialogue with the buying teams to be able to influence what customers were asking for. So we had a lot of overseas customers coming into the store wanting, let's say, cashmere knitwear within women's wear, or even cashmere within children's wear. So I was able to influence the buy decision, but also give feedback around assortment as well and price point. this price point's attractive, looking at our competition, etc., versus we can push the price point higher because of our customer that we have in Oxford Street.
Cool. Yeah, I think that, one of the things I discovered when I joined Neiman Marcus, after, and I was in IT, so I did not start from the sales floor, side of things. And what I rapidly discovered is nobody, in that back of house side was actually thinking about the customer.
Mm.
They were thinking about their customer as being the business.
Yeah.
Right. Not about being the person that walks in, between those, through that marble arch.
Yeah.
Right. And it's there to, shop. Right. And buy product. So that was a turning point in my career once I figured out I needed to be thinking about the retail customer, not the business first. I think so. I think your roots, from the sales floor have probably served you well as you moved, kind of up that chain of responsibility in retail. So you joined John Lewis in 2007, is that right?
Yeah, it was about 14 years ago, 14 and a half years ago.
So interestingly, 2007 is when John Lewis launched their Christmas advertisement, I think, which is apparently, I didn't know anything about it until I started researching for our today's conversation, to be honest. Apparently that's become a very iconic thing,
yeah.
Right? For that brand. And it actually, when I looked at it, it reminded me, that one of the things that Neiman Marcus is famous for, and there's a lot of parallels, and I think, and the Neiman Marcus story and the John Lewis story, to be quite honest. But one of the things that Neiman Marcus is famous for is their Christmas catalog, right? Which they've been publishing for many, many years. And everybody looks forward to the Christmas catalog with these crazy, uber expensive fantasy gifts in it. So, it feels to me like this Christmas advertisement, by the way, is kind of the John Lewis version of that, right? Of that Christmas catalog. It gets everybody talking, it causes a buzz, and it's a lot of free kind of airtime, right? For the brand. That's very fun, right? I think there's fun is underrated in our business. So any thoughts on that?
No, you're absolutely right. Our marketing teams, buying teams would go to the US and they would bring back catalogs from the US department stores. So the parallels between the two brands, I completely agree with you 100%. At John Lewis, we would look at Christmas as the opening of peak as such. So as soon as the advert landed or aired on UK TV, certainly that was the main driver back in the day, in the early years of when the Christmas advert first came out, and then there was more of a digital drive airing before, let's say, like terrestrial TV as such. But there was a big thing about the advert being the key lever to kickstart peak, and that's when we would land the advert and you'd literally see the volumes lift within 15 minutes because people had watched the advert, they'd watched it again, and let's say they were looking at it on a device, they're playing it back, and then it would resonate with them, and then they would go to the website to kickstart their gifting for Christmas.
Now I know the clock's ticking. I have to get it done. Interesting.
Yeah.
So
it was. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Please go.
Particularly within the UK and particularly within the toy space, so children's toys, there's always a greater demand than there is stock available. So we'd certainly see a big shift, particularly within the children's categories and gifting areas, because people wanted to get those gifts as quickly as possible and not disappoint, let's say, their children at Christmas.
And I guess we've just seen that pressure on availability just multiply even greater with the pandemic and the ever-present supply chain issues, right? With things. Have you? What was that like for you in your world here the last year or two?
It's been tough. It's been particularly tough. No matter how much you forecast, there was an element of we just couldn't get stock into the business. So certainly the message for shops were firmly sell what you have, sell it to the best of your ability. Within digital, so within the website, if a product wasn't available, we would then promote other products that were similar, that we thought customers would buy into, that were comparable products as such. What we found very quickly when you have high out of stocks was the ability to bury those products, so push them to the bottom of the grid page and show alternative products that customers would engage with, click through to the PLP and convert ideally. But it was incredibly tough. Stock was held up around the world. The majority of our stock would come from the Far East and Europe, but I think everybody was in the same position. We were fortunate enough whereby, we had an estate of stores that we were able to, when all the stores were closed in the UK, we were able to pull stock from those shops to furnish online.
Right.
And that's how, we grew the online mix to 75% of the business during the pandemic. And, indications suggest, yes, it will go back slightly, that 75%, but 65%, 70% in the future is the way in which I see the business model going at John Lewis.
I think about John Lewis, and I think that here's a company that's been around since forever, the 1800s, I think, right? Very well established. Neiman Marcus was founded in 1907. When I came there, I'd say that leadership was fairly conservative, fairly traditional retail leadership, right? But I think was eager to adapt, and change with the times, but it's hard when you have all that history that pushing back against you. I assume you experienced the same thing in your world at John Lewis. So how did you take that challenge on? What were the challenges, and how did you meet them?
I think when I joined John Lewis, we were the online part of the business was treated like a separate entity. So we were based in an office in Chelsea. So it was a warehouse conversion. It was very different to the traditional head office building. So head office currently is based on Victoria Street in central London. But in this warehouse environment, the whole setup felt entrepreneurial. So we were able to very much push the boundaries in terms of leadership and trying different techniques in terms of how we support teams, drive teams, change perspective. I suppose one of the biggest challenges I encountered was moving to head office, where it felt very corporate. Rightly so, looking back now, everything was by the book. But when you're a separate entity and you're treated like a startup, you can seek forgiveness when you get things wrong. But within the corporate settings of head office, it was different. It was quite tough. There was a lot of red tape. If you were, let's say, performance managing somebody, you'd stick, firmly, whichever site I was working on, you've got the law and you stick within the law. I just found that within head office, there was a lot more red tape to kind of go through, a lot more validation. I found working in the entrepreneurial setup quicker to cut through the treacle effect. You kind of get through it much quicker.
And was your move to the main offices part of a consolidation, an omni approach?
Yeah, so to very much win the hearts and minds of the complete business. So at this point, when I joined, it was a £60 million turnover of ecom, which has now grown to 2.5, 2.6, 2.7. The numbers haven't been published for last year, but it was very different.
I too was in an organization where the e-commerce business was treated as a separate business from the main. The biggest thing that they shared, e-commerce at Neiman Marcus and stores, was the name. And everything else was separate. The buying organization was separate. The management structure, was a separate set. I think that the e-commerce guys, in some ways were treated kind of like, at least early on, as sort of the redheaded stepchild, right? Of the business. But, they saw the light and they saw the need, right, to consolidate, as you can see happened at John Lewis as well, and that, and become a single business, because the customer didn't see them as separate.
That's right.
Right. The customer, when they shopped one or the other, wanted the same level of service and the same level of experience, and expected product to be coordinated across and pricing to be consistent and all those things, right? That are hard when they were separate, and now they need to not be. So as you think about that transition to a business, first let me say, did you give a general the percentage of that online contributes to John Lewis overall in terms of revenue? Do you know approximately what percentage of revenue it is?
Yeah, so certainly during COVID, it was about 75%, but the financial results for last year haven't been shared yet, but I suspect it'll be between 65 and 70%.
Which is incredible, but also probably should be considered an outlier.
Yeah.
I would assume that you would not expect that big of a gap to continue, as physical stores open and all this pent up demand to just get the hell out into the world comes around. In fact, maybe it even seesaws, too far the other way. It's certainly going to be a challenge for those that are, part of the reporting teams, right? If you figure, the kind of data that the buyers use to figure out what to buy and where to put it, man, that's going to be really hard to do for the next few years because the data is so skewed.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as a business, we would revert back to using 2019 data as a bit more of a, a stable basis. As a brand, during the period of COVID, they closed 8 branches, 8 stores. And then last year, there was another 8 stores that closed. So about 16, 17 stores have closed during the time of COVID. That we know there's also that consideration as well. And plus you've got this difficulty with not enough stock coming into the business because it's caught up around the world.
And prior to COVID, Bradley, what was the e-commerce contribution to the whole to the company as a whole?
So it would kind of fluctuate a lot. So I would probably say round about some categories would stay at that 70%, but overall about I'd say 45%, 50%.
Wow, that's super high. Yeah. I feel like that's really high. We were pretty proud to say, that, e-commerce was doing 33, 34% at Emmons. And for here, at least in the US, that was very high, a very high contribution. for online. Now, again, I'm not there anymore, so I'm not privy to the numbers any longer. But I assume that the numbers are very skewed, over the last couple of years there as well.
No, very much so. And I left John Lewis back in September, so it's difficult for me to kind of give you accurate numbers. So I look at what's available out there within the World Wide Web as such.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Bradley, what were your, when it comes to the whole digital transformation process? Because I think you started as a sales associate advisor, however you define that, especially in the UK, and then your career progressed into becoming one of the leaders in the digital commerce at John Lewis. And I'm very curious to understand what were your typical challenges there that you faced as let's say your career progressed and that the numbers got bigger as well. Can you comment maybe the 3 to 5 typical challenges that you had?
Yeah, I suppose one of the biggest challenges, I think, leaving House of Fraser. So my most recent role to leaving there was I was buying. So I was buying products, and that was my hook to move into johnlewis.com as such. The role I did when I first joined was selecting products for the website. So if you remember, I was saying it was treated like a separate entity, and also paginating publications. So we would have a home catalogue, a Christmas catalogue, a nursery catalogue, etc., etc. One of the biggest challenges, I think, coming into John Lewis was, as a business, you're a co-owner in the business when you first join, and they do business very differently to a traditional retailer like House of Fraser, Selfridges, Harrods, etc. And I found that quite challenging at the beginning, because a lot of people would say, "But we don't do business like that here at John Lewis. We're co-owners in the business. We're not ruthless in our delivery in terms of how we get the best deal for the business." So I found that quite difficult at first. One occasion that springs to mind was I had a deadline to submit something, let's say 3 p.m. in the afternoon. The stakeholder hadn't sent the information through by, let's say, 2:50 or something. And I didn't lose it, but I was just getting quite stressed out about it, because I'd come from an environment whereby everything was done quickly to chase after something. Or at John Lewis, it was more measured. It was a calmer environment to go into. Looking back, a great calmer environment, but I did find it quite challenging in the early days of my career, because it's just that ruthless, go get it, do it now, JFDI just didn't sit nicely with John Lewis. And I'm a better person from working at John Lewis compared to House of Fraser. That makes it sound a little bit like I was a bit of a dragon there, but I wasn't, I can assure you. And then kind of progressing within John Lewis, other challenges was, trying to get people on board to understand your ideas, your initiatives, your strategy, let's say. So one that springs to mind is bringing in automation within copywriting. So starting from a place whereby we had a number of copywriters, but as time has moved on, technology has become available to automate copy descriptions. So the descriptive text that sits on a product listing page, a PLP. The challenges that came with that were twofold. First was individuals. So at John Lewis, where I spoke about us being co-owners, we were classed as partners. So it was about bringing partners on board on the journey with automation to help them better understand how robotics can play an important part of, how we get information to customers quicker, and how it can drive incremental sales. So that very much was about breaking down how robotics could help us as a business, and not necessarily at that point risk us losing headcount, jobs, individuals from the team. The second part with automation was trying to get IT on board to integrate the tool that I was working with. So this tool was called Textual, a small startup out of Sweden. Great company to collaborate with, and use their tool to our advantage to launch up to 3,000 products during the course of an average week at John Lewis. But me being me, I went around the process. So we did something within the team. We had budget available, so we was working off of scripts, Excel sheets between John Lewis and Textual, sharing data to then input into our content management system. The end state would be IT would fully integrate it. However, that proved challenging to get them on board. So we did a bit of a test and learn, and it was really successful.
Very nice. I think there's always a major challenge with IT. When I was an intern, I worked for Siemens, 300,000 employees, and it was maddening because I was in charge of I remember that my boss at the time, there was this project where we had to do the rollout of a CRM, and I was in charge of the project as an intern because she didn't speak English. So that was the coolest project that I could have as an intern, but I needed to deal a lot with the IT guys, and for some really simple stuff. For example, permissions, right? I needed to ask for a permission, like to create new users for the CRM, for the IT guys in Brazil, the IT department, and then they would ask another permission for the IT department in Germany. And just that small process would take maybe 2 days, And so I think I completely understand what you mean when it comes to having like the IT sometimes as a blocker, right? In accelerating some digital initiatives that the companies need to implement. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, but I think looking at it, I do 100% sympathize with the IT team, because they've got multiple stakeholders coming at them, all kind of, banging at the door saying, I've got the biggest, brightest idea that would drive revenue or reduce our costs within the business. So, I can understand their element, their stage gating, their triaging of work coming into them. But yeah, I've got a bit of a history for going around standard processes, which very much I did at John Lewis, to try and get something over the line, to test and learn, to think of the end state. We were there for customers. Customers were driving the revenue for the business and also the profitability for the business.
Mm-hmm. And
that was the role of the iLab that I created at Emmons. Was that role was to be the IT voice that you could partner with.
Yeah.
So who did you find at John Lewis to partner with on the IT side? Where, basically one of my jokes I would say is that the only time we said yes in IT was when we agreed to say no. That we were in the no business, and we needed to get into the let's try, right? Yes, we can try business. Who did you find to partner with to do that, to achieve that?
Yeah, so over the course of time and after much feedback with IT, we were given an IT contact. So we were given a lead that we would work with to kind of scope out business ideas, look at return, et cetera, and that helped for a period of time, particularly where I was looking at new vendors to bring in and, let's say, automate a process or just reduce costs, et cetera. Having them come along with me to a business meeting, very quickly, I could gauge their reaction in terms of, okay, will this pay back for us as a business? How long might this take, alongside 100 other priorities that everyone's feeding in, to integrate into our system as such? So that helped us tremendously as a team in terms of having someone there to kind of not just validate, but also bounce ideas around when you're going out looking for new vendors.
When I think about the project, for copy automation, obviously, you enabled more SKUs to be put online at a lower cost, right? So essentially you're innovating, in the e-commerce space. What other big innovations happened during your tenure at John Lewis? You think that that tipped the scales, changed the game, whatever?
Yeah. So that was copy that I spoke to you about. Also,
right.
Merchandising. We introduced robotics. So previously we were working with systems that required basically humans to do every action, switch it onto the website, turn it off of the website, change the lead time, change the image order, change the copy block, etc. So over the course of about 3 years, we introduced more robotics. So we'd call it RPA, robotics process automation, giant macros, if you like, whereby I think it was round about, over the course of the year, there was 1.8 million actions that we removed from the web, from humans switching something off, enabling it, changing a lead time. And because the robot could operate, or the robots would operate 7 days a week, they drove incremental sales of about 2 million, about 1.9 million, something around about that number. Because again, it was colleagues in other teams, other stakeholders that were giving instructions to my team to that, switch that product back on. It's just come back into stock into the business, or something has been switched off because it's going to be out of stock for, let's say, 12 weeks. The system wasn't sophisticated enough to switch it back on by itself when stock appeared in a distribution center available for e-com to sell. So to automate those processes, drove incremental sales, but also made the jobs more rewarding for the users of the business tool as well.
And Bradley, all these innovations that you would bring to John Lewis with your team, I mean, a lot of them, we could say that people would lose jobs, or not necessarily, but those jobs would also evolve. Because I think that's also what's fascinating about technology, right? So you're eliminating a repetitive task, and then you're replacing that task with, the need for brains or whatever. Can you maybe comment on how the jobs progressed at John Lewis? Because I think that's a fascinating aspect of what you.
Yeah, certainly within merchandising, we were able to repurpose roles. So I would give my merchandisers other responsibilities. So because they are involved in what was probably about a third of their time, between 25% and a third of their time, switching things off, switching things on and off, etc., we were able to get them to do simple things like housekeeping of the website, critiquing the website. Are we happy with how women's dresses was presented, one of the biggest categories within fashion? So it enabled people to spend more time, as you would in a retail shop, getting your shop in order, making sure your stall is set and you're happy with how it's presented. Introducing the automation within merchandising did mean I was able to reduce the team size, because it was a fraction of every merchandiser's job. However, I didn't have to restructure the team. It was very much a case of when somebody left the team. So I didn't have a high turnover of staff, But when people did leave, we just wouldn't replace them because we would have repurposed people's roles within the team to take on more responsibility, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm thinking back at, at my time and at Neiman's, and I think one of the big things that I saw happen, was just like you did the copy automation. We had some innovative guys, figure out, how to automate some of the photography.
Yep.
We were using I think the company was called Looklet, that would allow us to take, fashion pictures without expensive photo shoots. And allow them to substitute. And so, it felt like a game changer. All of these things, whether it's, your copy automation or this, changing the way the photography, assembly line worked or whatever, and as Carlos had mentioned, right, it involved, either repurposing, pivoting skills, or perhaps bringing some new folks in with different skills than before. Thinking about that, what was your challenges and your strategy for hiring and maintaining talent during your time?
Yeah, I think when it comes to hiring people, you want to get the best people for your team. I think everybody would probably say that on these podcasts, most certainly. You want to get the best people. What I'd always try to enable was, can I promote from within my team? Do I have the talent within the team to promote somebody? I'm a firm believer in when you take a role profile or a job outline, let's say you look at somebody's, when someone's advertising for a position, I'll bring someone in if it's external, or I'll offer the job to somebody internal. If they can do about 80%, 75%, 80% of the requirement, I don't want to bring someone in that does 100%, because that, it'll be a walk in the park for them and they'll be off before I know it. So I want to bring someone in that knows the majority about the job, but also can learn with the job and can face into new challenges as they arise. I think within John Lewis, there were many a challenge with regards to recruitment, certainly in the last few years, where there was a much greater focus on profitability because the sales weren't coming through as an overall business, from before the pandemic as such. So there was a big freeze on recruitment. So we ended up being in a position whereby we had to drive more talent from within the business, from other parts of the business, to come into the e-com side of things, where sometimes if you're looking for a specialist, let's say like a copywriter, they're an expert in the written word, you'll have a great team that you've built. Over the course of time, people will naturally leave. There's only so much talent from elsewhere in the business that has a skill to write copy, descriptive copies, titles, etc., etc. So there does come a pinch point whereby you have to say, I've exhausted all options within the business. I have to go external, and that was a bit of a barrier for some time. But we overcome these things.
Just like there's supply chain issues with product, there's a supply chain issue with talent too these days, right? With the great, what do they call it, Carlos? The great resignation or whatever.
Resignation.
Yeah. So thinking about that, what do you think, Bradley, in terms of successful strategies for retention? I mean, I think that trying to hold on to the good folks that you already have is probably more important than ever.
I think it all starts with creating an environment where people feel comfortable. They can bring their authentic self to work. We were a really early adopter of hybrid working, one of the first teams within the partnership, I'd say. So John Lewis is made up of John Lewis and Partners and Waitrose and Partners. So Waitrose is the supermarket division of the brand. other departments, such as buying and merchandising, only moved to mostly working from home just before the pandemic, just before we kind of locked down the London office. So it's giving individuals flexibility as well to work from where they feel they can get the job done. And if we look at the wider industry, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be done in the UK. You don't have to work from the UK office anymore. The industry is, you know, radically changing, but then so too is the rest of the work from home culture.
I assumed that work from home was not a culture that was popular with the John Lewis senior management before the pandemic. Would that be fair to say?
I would say within ecom, it was there. We did it. We were encouraged to do it. It was non-ecom areas that struggled to embrace it, because traditionally they've always been, you know, based in an office. Particularly if we talk about colleagues within buying and merchandising, you know, they'd be in a space, an open office with samples all around them. So to then say to them, okay, now you need to start working from home, by default, what happens to all these, you know, all this sampling around me? How, you know, how the hell am I going to do it? But then COVID struck and it forced everyone's hand to make it happen. You know, ship the samples to your home address, or do you have to see a sample in some instances? Can you not go off of a CAD drawing? You know, the traditional sign-off process changed quite drastic, you know, quite significantly for buying.
Well, I mean, just as a side, I mean, it's really a sideline, but I think about, you know, the buyers, you know, where I worked, and a lot of them were there specifically for the experience of being able to travel to, you know, see product in person. Mm-hmm. You know, and you know, that was a big, you know, they didn't really, I don't think it really actually paid all that well. You know, being a buyer, that, you know, the benefit, you know, was, you know, actually the travel and the, you know, the experiences you got, you know, as being part of that organization. So now, you know, with this much more digital capabilities, and, you know, not necessarily having to go in person, what do you see that as well? Is that did that impact you know, your ability to, you know, fill the role of buyer?
No, I think very much there's always a demand for the role of buyer. So I think, you know, I haven't been a buyer for what is 14, 15 years. So, you know, it would have changed significantly. I know when I was at House of Fraser, yeah, there was an element of, I get the opportunity to travel and, you know, have all these experiences, but actually it was quite grueling in many ways. You know, you're always up against it in terms of a stopwatch, excuse me, which meant, okay, I have a number of appointments, I have X amount of data that will help inform those appointments. I need to source new brands. Plus, I need to try and get around, let's say, the department stores to see what's new, who's innovating, what brands are people buying into, etc., etc. I always felt as if I was up against it in terms of time. There was never enough time. As soon as I landed somewhere, I was at an appointment, working till late, submitting buys, and then I was, let's say, if I was doing a 2-day trip, then I was doing the shops, then doing more appointments, you know, trying to scout new brands to bring on board for House of Fraser, and then boom, I'm back on the Eurostar or a plane back to the UK and sleep deprived. But you know, that's probably one of the big things that buyers encounter. But then during COVID, it changed things. It changed it for the whole industry. You know, Zoom calls were happening and samples were being shown on a call similar to this, or more samples were being made and being shipped around the world to someone's house to to make a decision, or they were going off of a CAD drawing. So yeah, it definitely changed things. Will it return back to its heyday, if you can call it? I don't know. Budgets are being squeezed
out of the bottle.
What's that?
I said, I think the genie's out of the bottle. That going back to the general work from home discussion, I don't know what the new normal looks like, but it doesn't look like the old normal.
Agreed. Yeah. Agreed, massively.
Yeah. Well, one question I'd like to ask you, because you've lived through, sort of the evolution of e-commerce. When you started, you started, on the e-commerce side back in 2007. That's still pretty early in the game. I think I started working on it, even earlier than that. And in previous roles, I don't even want to tell you how far back it goes, but it goes back to the very primitive beginnings of e-commerce. So, I think, you've seen it evolve from, hey, let's just take our catalog and we'll make it online, right? To, I think all sorts of attempts to, add personalization and recommendations and, things that allow, a better experience, for the customer, as well as this consolidation of the physical and the digital businesses into a more comprehensive, combined approach, right? I'm trying to avoid using the word omnichannel poorly there. So what's next? Let's, and I guess I'm sort of, eking towards the, all this, hype around the metaverse, which, another name for that is, the next generation web, right? What do you think? Where are we going?
Oh, the metaverse. If in all honesty, I'm still trying to get my head around it as well. But there are people that are, I say dabbling into it. Arguably you could say they're kind of going for it, aren't they? A brand like H&M, a presence in the metaverse. How long would it take? And by no means is this meant as a criticism. How long would it take someone like John Lewis to move into the metaverse? I'd honestly say a few years. Never the quickest or the first to market in that sense. Strategically, they'll be sitting, watching, listening, watching other people fail, and then probably dip their toe into it, but very much a test and learn approach. And that's very much how the whole e-com business was built up, is through testing and learning. I think as we move forward and we look wider and we talk about technology in the future, it's here now, isn't it, in terms of voice and voice recognition. If I mention the name of my device, it will start talking back to me now without a doubt. That will only get better. That will be more and more fine-tuned and become quite normal. You can talk to your TV now. I turn to my side because my TV's over there in case anyone thinks I've got a bit of twitch. But yeah, the way in which the industry will move forward, people will want more and more, quicker and quicker, and sustainability plays a key part in that. People, customers, the younger generation in particular, want full traceability about a product, whether that's something they're buying or something they're eating. So we need to be more comfortable being able to present that information, or be able to, capture that information, whether we're working with vendors, etc., because, the future generations, in my opinion, they care more about where something's coming from when they want that full traceability.
Was that something you felt at John Lewis? Let's say I'm 36 years old and I have 2 daughters. I think my generation is already very conscious, but when I look at my daughters, they are born differently. They are wired in a different way. It's very interesting. And was that something you felt from that younger maybe generation when they came to your website, some sort of pressure where they would question leadership or customer service teams about, where's this product coming from? Can you comment a little bit on that note, Bradley?
Yeah,
Please?
definitely. There would always be feedback loops. Be that contact centers, we would do a questionnaire to 1 in 1,000 customers to the website, or there'd be a feedback document at the footer of the homepage. And we had lots of feedback around, okay, where is this product made? What are the conditions in terms it was made in? What are the ingredients within this product in terms of how it's, let's say like a beauty product, they want to know whether it's cruelty-free, and rightly so, and whether it's vegan, etc., etc. More and more feedback would be coming through, which would then enable us as a business to kind of look at the facts on the table and say, okay, there's a pattern starting here, or there's a theme, excuse me. This is something we need to be in a position to better communicate to customers. So then we'd work with our suppliers, let's say within beauty, to start getting lists of ingredients and better information around, okay, is it vegan friendly, etc., etc. So I think you're absolutely right. We care about it in terms of our generation, but the future generations, yeah, completely. They're programmed differently. I look at TikTok, I look at Instagram, and you just see the way in which people are interacting with the tools. They're using those tools for information and to very much communicate what their expectations are when it comes to a brand.
Fantastic. Scott, I think we have one final question. Maybe you'd like to ask Bradley a final question. And then, of course, Bradley, just so you know, you will be invited for panels if you like. It's been an honor. I think you're a great speaker, very interesting career. So yeah.
Thank you. Oh yeah, I'd love to.
Sure thing.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll end with what do you think the best ways to bring a human touch back to digital commerce? I think for me, that's something, that I believe is, a missing component in a lot of experiences online. And as the digital part of a business, in your case, you're talking these huge contributions, right? It's now the face of the company at John Lewis, as an example. How do we keep that from, becoming, just a bunch of interactions, with bots and recommendation engines?
I think there's several ways. Something that John Lewis went after was, I call it click to chat. So it's managed by the contact centers, but it's the ability for a customer to interact with you, a human customer to interact with another human being to talk about a particular product. So we'd get a lot of queries around large electrical products, fridge, freezers, washing machines, etc. However, we were able to reduce the level of returns from asking, or from being able to answer some what would be quite simple questions to us. It also enabled us click to chat to improve the product page. So, for example, of all the queries that went through to the contact centers, probably about 25% of them were large electrical, and one of them was, what is one of the most, to this day, one of the biggest queries was, what is the length of the cable that's going to come with the fridge freezer?
I know the answer. It's not long enough. That's the answer.
Absolutely. But where we're able to then add that information to the product page, or it might have been, what's the packaging size, because they need to be able to get it through their building or up the stairwell or something, staircase. We were able to significantly reduce the level of returns from having that information on the product page, or being able to answer it on the click to call to the customer. I think in today's world, as we move forward, it's really, and it might sound, quite basic, you have to listen to what the customer is saying. So whichever way they choose to communicate with you, how can you respond? So John Lewis were really great. And as I was saying, it's a great brand to work for, and I miss the people tremendously. John Lewis were great at responding to, in my opinion, negative feedback. So ratings and reviews, which we had applied to the majority of our assortments, there would generally be a stance of, if it was a 1-star review and more than, I think, 3 customers had rated it once, it would come off of the website, pending investigation, with the supplier or with the relevant own brand buying team.
Interesting.
Let's say. But it's important where someone's negatively talking about one of your products, that you're able to interact with them. And if you're not, if you're not aware of it, actually say to them, thanks for bringing this to our attention. We'll talk to the buying team, we'll talk to the buying office, we'll validate the price, etc., whatever the query was. So we got a lot of positive feedback from having engagement with customers through ratings and reviews, but also through social commerce as well. It's really important, whether somebody's complimenting your brand or criticizing your brand, recognizing that they've taken the time to let you know that they're happy or they're not happy with a particular product. Or the Christmas advert, shining example, you love it or you loathe it. Fortunately, more people loved it.
Looked like, more people love it for sure. All right, Bradley. Well, that just flew by. We're coming up at the end of our hour. We want to, Carlos and I want to thank you again for taking the time to sit and chat with us today and being a guest on the e-commerce growth show USA. And Carlos, I'll let you take us out.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you very much, Bradley. I think it's been incredible to learn about your career. As I said, been following you for at least 5 years. So it's great now that we have this opportunity to sit and talk and exchange and listen to you and exchange experiences. So great. And that's it. Thanks very much, Bradley. By the way, one last thing, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way?
So like through LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, Bradley Lane. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, go for
Maybe
it.
for business opportunities or conversations.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Conversations, more than happy to. Thank you both. This was my first ever podcast.
All right.
Well done.
Well, it was great. It was great fun. Thank you again.
Thank you. I was quite nervous, but I thought, no, fight through it.
Nice.
See you both later.